Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on our webinar today. My name is Alison and this is my co-host Tracy. This webinar is brought to you from our office in West Leederville, Western Australia. We are delighted to present our webinar titled, Building a Strong Parent-Child Relationship, and how to reinforce your connection for their mental well-being. Before we begin though, I would like to make acknowledgement of country. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Noongar people as the original custodians of this land on which we're presenting today, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The information discussed in this webinar is general in nature and does not take into account specific personal situations or circumstances you may currently be experiencing. You should consider whether the information is appropriate for your needs and where appropriate, seek professional advice. If you or someone you know is experiencing a crisis in their life, please contact Lifeline on 131114 or emergency services on 000. Okay, so now to begin, let's get started. So Tracy.
Hi, Alison. Hi, everybody. I think the best way to start our conversation on building a strong parent-child relationship would be to have a look at the what we call emotion regulation. Because as a parent, we need to be able to co-regulate with our child. So knowing what emotion regulation is really important. If you can see on the slide that there's an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. So your upstairs brain is actually your prefrontal cortex, and your downstairs brain is your emotion center in your amygdala. But it's up the top here, which is basically understood as your thinking brain, where you make decisions, where you can focus and concentrate, where you can show empathy, so feelings for other people, where you're aware of yourself and where you are in space, and also the control you have over your body. The downstairs brain is a little bit different. The downstairs brain is really about your body reactions to emotions and the emotions themselves. So your emotions are generated in the downstairs brain. Things like your fight, flight and freeze response. Your fight response and flight and freeze is when you're responding to a big emotion such as fear, where you're preparing your body to either fight what's making you scared, run away from what's making you scared, or freeze from the thing that's making you scared. So as adults, we can really have times when we do this a lot. So say if we're in a group of people, we're with a bunch of friends and somebody says something that makes you really angry, we can use that thinking brain, the upstairs brain, to stop ourselves from acting that out, so we think before we act. And we might think, oh, well, this person, they're always saying things like that, so I'm going to let that go. That's using your empathy. Say your decision, you decide that you're not going to really say anything about it. You might say something about it a little later. That's your decision-making brain. This is also your problem-solving brain. And being aware that there's other people around you and you don't want to respond in a bad way. That's actually using your upstairs brain as well. And in terms of your body control, you can control that. You can calm yourself down. You can take a deep breath in. You can kind of think, oh, well, I'm not going to deal with that right now. I'm going to set that aside, and you regulate your emotion. Unfortunately, kids can't do that. So the terrible twos is a perfect example. If we look at our next slide. Quite often parents see what goes on with the terrible twos and think that, oh my goodness, my child has become a monster. The children can run away, they can have these massive meltdowns, they're crying uncontrollably, sometimes hitting other children or you, banging their head on things, breaking things, running away and hiding, jumping up and down, not listening, things like that. So what's happening in that space is that the child has not got the connection. If you remember from the first slide, you have the upstairs and the downstairs brain, and you have this connection, this set of stairs that join both of them together. In a child that's around that age, your toddler age, what we call the terrible twos, the connection isn't formed yet. It's not there. They can think about things and they can feel emotions, but then they're not using the two together. So what our job as parents is in those times is to actually co-regulate with the child, help that child to co-regulate. That helps, and the best thing to do in that is to, first of all, calm the child down. So if you're living in your downstairs brain, which is a child like this, a child who's this young, that only knows how they feel. So I feel happy, or I feel sad, or I feel angry, or I feel sleepy. And their body will show you those things because it's the bodily reactions. And they don't have the understanding or the mental capacity to actually use the upstairs brain to help them to understand what those feelings are about. You as a parent need to be able to do that. And that's called co-regulation. We'll have a look on the next slide for that.
So Tracy, what you're saying is when, parents come in and they, will say things like, my child does this on purpose, they're doing attention, they're doing it because they hate me, or, all the other stuff. So what would be the best way to respond to a parent when they sort of say those or have those thoughts?
We really got to stop ourselves from saying that, because that can then activate us. And we become like, so a child can get really angry, and we can feel as though I'm not being a good parent because my child is actually throwing a tantrum. If we remember that they're not actually equipped to be able to think that through and be able to come up with that solution of being able to calm themselves down, if we remember that as parents, then we're going to be better off, because we're not going to stress when the child's stressed. And what's the important part there is to be able to actually move towards the child and calm the child down. And then you're teaching the child to do that themselves. So co-regulation is future child having an understanding of what they need to say to themselves, what they need to think about, and what they're going to learn from the situation. But you have to do it in those first formative years when the child is a toddler and moving on from their school age even as well. So, yeah.
So it sounds like co-regulating is something that you model, like from your behaviours to the child.
Yes. So you can model it outside of yourself by reacting yourself in ways that are healthy, but you can also help the child to get to that upstairs brain as well. So we're looking at the slide down here. Now, the downstairs brain, you can see it's looking as though it's just had something happen. There's been a big emotion. Perhaps the child got their toy taken away from them by another child, say. And the downstairs brain is being activated. They're feeling it in their body. They're having a crying fit or a tantrum. Now, there's no point in a parent being able to try and teach the child something in that moment. In that moment, they're living in downstairs brain in the highly activated emotional state, right? Sometimes what you'll find is that the kids go really stiff and they can't, you can't do anything with them. They're just stiff in the body. Sometimes you find that they go really floppy and they flop all over the place, and you're trying to kind of get them to look at you even, and they can't. Quite often they won't be able to look at you. They certainly can't hear what you're saying. It's going in one ear and out the other. So that's because they're reacting. They're having an emotional reaction to what's happened, and you need to be able to calm them down from that emotional reaction. So
would you say things like telling your child to look me in the eyes and, stay focused and answer me now, those wouldn't be the right responses in trying to co-regulate yourself and your child?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, it's going to go nowhere, and you're going to get frustrated as a parent. So if you keep on doing that in the wrong moment, there is a moment for that, but the moment is after they've calmed first. So if you can imagine that if they don't have that stairway built from that emotional co-regulation there, if the stairway is not built, you have to help them to build that stairway. And part of doing that is doing the calming down for them. They react to you. So if a child is angry at something because something happened and you get angry as well, then the child's going to react with you and be angry. And it just gets you just sort of like piling up anger upon anger. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for you to be able to set that boundary and understand. If you understand that it's a normal behavior for a child, you shouldn't really have too hard a problem unless you're being triggered, and you'll talk about that a little later on. Yeah. So the point of that one is just trying to teach during those emotional times is pointless. Get the child to be in their upstairs brain again, which is when their thinking brain is switched on. And then you can do all all of the teaching. So you can reason with the child, you can explain things to the child, you can actually talk about bigger concepts like sharing and how to behave in shopping centres and things like that. Whereas when they're in that downstairs brain, they're not able to do that.
So would this be the space where you talk about feelings, like when they're in the upstairs brain, like the feelings that might be too hard to process?
Yeah. Once they're in that upstairs brain space again, where they're able, a good idea to see is to notice if the child is looking at you. So notice if they've stopped crying, stop being upset, then they're actually looking you in the eye. They're able to hear what you're saying. They can talk and talk back to you when you talk to them. Then you know, okay, they're back in the upstairs brain, and I can now explain things to them. Unfortunately, for some kids, they are living in a space where they have experienced something that is too big to process. And that's when their downstairs brain's been activated, but it keeps getting activated all the time. Okay, and this is sometimes referred to as trauma. I can use bullying as an example. If a child is going to school and they're being bullied on a regular basis, or then what happens is the child is always in a fear state. They're scared all the time. They're scared at school, and they can keep feeling scared at home because that feeling that they're feeling is really hard for them to process. They don't have all of the information that they should have to be able to process that huge thing called fear, and fearing for your life as well. So if a child finds themselves in a space where they don't feel safe, where their psychological, physical, or emotional well-being is somehow being threatened, like a long-term bullying issue at school, they can find that they're constantly in that downstairs brain mode, in fight, flight, or freeze. And this can happen to a child at any age. So it's really important for the child to be able to, or for the parent to know that I still need to co-regulate my child, even if my child's like 15. It's really still important, because what's actually going on in the brain there is that if you're in a fear state all the time, or for a lot of the time, you're always searching around in your environment. You're on high alert, all systems are go. You're just getting ready, you know, like you're getting ready to either run away or fight or whatever. And it doesn't matter, that the threat might not even be there, but you can still feel it in your body. So that constant scanning of the environment, it's called hypervigilance. So you are hyper-focused on what's going on the outside of you, so that you can really run away fast, or you can react quickly to a threat. If you're hypervigilant, it means that you are overstimulated as well. So can you imagine yourself having to, it's like being in a situation where like you're scared in the woods and you can hear footsteps and stuff around you, and you having to take notice of every single sound, every single snap of a twig, every single rustle of a bush, any light that comes in front of you. All of your senses are turned on really fast, or you know, and they're really heightened, and that can give you brain exhaustion. You can feel really tired from that. Like if you then get into a safe space and you're like, oh my goodness, that was exhausting. This can be what's happening for a child who's bullied or is not feeling as though they're in a safe space. They then become really overwhelmed. So they're living with this overwhelm as well, this overwhelm of feelings, because there are consequences to that too. They can be easily distracted, and now that leads to really poor concentration. So they might not be able to do the dishes without getting distracted, or it's hard for them to keep in routines. It's hard for them to focus and concentrate at school because their mind is always on this hyper alert. So it's really important for parents to understand at that point in time where co-regulation is still necessary in those times. So it's really important for you to actually still be almost like having the child in that state where they're 2 years old, to be able to be there, make those connections. Okay. Ways to build the stairs. So if you think back to the upstairs and downstairs brain, there's a set of stairs that go up to the upstairs brain. So there are 2 ways to do it. It's really, and I think this is crucial for parents to understand, because a lot of parents are time poor, you know, and they don't have a lot of time to spend talking to their kids and connecting to the kids and things like that, you know. So in calm times, it's really good for you to actually build the stairs. That's what the planks of wood are for. If you look on the screen, there's these planks of wood. They are the foundation of those stairs, of connecting the upstairs and the downstairs brain. And during those calm times, what's important is for you to build your relationship with your child. Playfulness is extremely important. I can't overestimate the important thing, playful with your child. So when you muck around, be silly and be playful with your kids, then they're actually having a good time. They're building a memory of connection to you that's positive. Same with positive attention. Notice when your kid does something well, if they're doing something and you think it's a great thing. We often really hyper-focused on discipline and what they're doing wrong, and actually to help the child along, figure out what they're doing right and constantly reaffirm that to the child. That helps to create connection as well. And routine is extremely important. Routine provides the child with predictability. When we find that our world is quite predictable, this happens at this time, this happens at this time, this happens at this time, we feel a little safer. We feel as though we have some boundaries. We feel like we know what's going to come next, especially with children with anxiety. If not knowing what's happening, knowing what's going to come next is quite comforting. And that's really where we want to be when we're parenting, and where the child needs to be is in a space of safety and comfort.
So
then there's the other times.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Yep. I was just going to say, so with the routine, you know, what I guess with setting a routine, it doesn't have to be regimental. It doesn't have to be fixed that we do dinner at this time, we do bath at this time. It could still be playful and spontaneous, but we can also still have that predictability in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The more spontaneous it is, the better, you know. But knowing that, okay, mum always reads the story before we go to bed. Yeah. It can be whatever time, you know, those things can change. The times and things can change. It doesn't have to be really stringent, but it's knowing that I know that that's going to happen at this time. I know that I've got I've got half an hour before I go to sleep where I've got some of mum's attention. I know that mum's going to ask me to help her cook dinner. Or whatever those things are, those little connections. So yeah, doesn't have to be regimented. Probably better it isn't regimented, but it's predictable. That's the important part of it, is providing that predictability.
Yeah. Okay.
The other time that you can build the stairs is so you've got the foundation of the stairs in your actual relationship, and the next part of that is when things go wrong. That's when you need to provide some stability. So that's the hammer and the nail that you see on the screen. And that's basically when there's emotional times for your child. So during those emotional times, when there's an emotional outburst, when something's happened, when something's gone wrong and the child's having a bit of a meltdown, that's when we need to stabilize the connection, the relationship that we've been building with that child. So you respond rather than react. And Alison is going to talk a little bit in a minute about our own triggers that can stop us from responding. Responding is about using our thinking brain when we respond to the child, so that we respond with compassion and with empathy for the child's situation. Reacting is going with the feeling that we're getting, because we can get annoyed. It's really annoying sometimes when a child's having a meltdown. We don't know quite why or what to do. So if we're responding and using the body to respond, that's usually a feeling of being annoyed. We've got to go back up here into the thinking brain and respond with our empathetic brain, understand where the child's coming from. Also, when the child's really upset, we move towards the child. So there's a progressive movement towards the child. You're wanting to establish physical contact, all of those sort of things. You're wanting to be able to get close to the child, so the child knows mum's here, dad's here, nan's here, whoever is caregiving is here, and I'm safe in their presence, because you've already built that safety in the way you play and the connections that you make and stuff. Soothing your child, calming them down, taking them from that downstairs brain to that upstairs brain, really, really important in those emotional times. And that gives you a little bit of time to actually, once they are calm and they're thinking again and they're able to focus and concentrate on you and listen to you, that's when you can do all of the learning stuff. That's where you can teach them about what happened, what were you feeling in that time, you know. Mummy doesn't like you to hit another child. It's not very nice. You've got to think about how that child thinks, all that sort of stuff, you know, that comes into it. If you're trying to do it the other way, trying to get those lessons across when the child is in that emotional mind, then it's going to be really hard for them to take in because they can't concentrate very well. So, did you want to talk about some of the things that parents can do with, like, for school ages and teenagers and stuff?
Yeah, I think it'll be really important to kind of go through, like, you know, that playfulness, some activities, because I guess, you know, we're doing a lot of the talking stuff, but if you're anything like me, I like a bit of a hack every now and then in life. So
Yeah.
sort of activities that you would promote for, like, school age and teenage kids in particular, that would be able to build these connections and, you know, still be playful.
Yep. Well, probably doing some outdoor games and stuff like that. So, you know, bat and ball games, things like that. Taking them out and going for a walk, riding a bike with them, all of those things. But the activities that you want to do, you want to have a chance to be able to really have a connection. So playing side by side on a video game might be fun, but you're not actually really physically connecting with the child. You kind of parallel play. So things that actually allow you to have conversation, allow you to have a bit of a laugh, allow you to be a little bit silly, allow you to muck around a bit. So cooking's a great one for school age kids if they're old enough, is you know, getting out in the kitchen with mum. It's something you can do together. You create something together. That's creating a really nice memory in the child's mind, and it's connecting you. And they feel really proud of themselves, and they can feel like they've really done well, like if they're eating the food that they've cooked and they've done it with mum. Just being silly, playing chasey around the house, you know, even mucking around and sort of tickling and things like that. So being physically close to each other as well is a really important thing. Getting involved in kids' routines, that sometimes parents will kind of say, okay, go clean up your room, and wonder why the child doesn't clean up their room. They have to, if you think of it like walking, you know, when you're learning to walk, doing chores and routines and stuff can be made fun, and they're more likely to learn it if you do it in a fun way. And if you're sharing it with them, like when a child's learning how to walk, little babies were learning how to walk, we don't sort of tell them off when they fall over. We help them to get up, you know, that sort of thing. It's a little bit like that. If a child has to take a long time to learn how to clean up their room, it's not as easy as people think. It's actually a habit, and habits form over a long period of time. So helping them to do that, mucking around, you know, making a game of it. Okay, you get all the clothes, I'll get all the rubbish, and we'll like throw them into a bin or something like that from afar. Making up stuff like that, making really boring things fun, can help you to create that connection and have fun times, even in things that aren't so much fun. For teenagers, it's a little bit different, because teenagers are really wanting to kind of have that separation, not only a physical separation, but a mental separation, a psychological separation from their parent. So active listening is really the best thing you can do. Just hearing your child and not giving advice. It's really hard for parents. I know for myself it's not easy, but active listening is probably one of the greatest things you can do to connect, because a child is almost expecting you to give them a solution and they might not need one. So you become a consultant rather than a manager. When the kids are little, you're managing them, you're taking them to soccer, you're telling them what to do, you're giving them advice and guidance and direction. When they're a teenager, they're trying to find their own feet. They're trying to find where they're at themselves. They're trying to find what they like, what they don't like, what's their groove, you know. So for a parent to watch that happen is probably the best thing you can do, and wait for them to consult you on stuff. Also providing like a safe space for them to chill out as well. So you can make it a day or a week or something of doing their room, so that they can feel really connected and feel as though they've got a safe space, and you can help them to do that. So a little bit more sticky with teenagers, but you know, I've had self-care days with my daughter, things like that, where we're applying masks and doing things like that. That's also a nice thing to be able to do. Taking them out somewhere where they enjoy being is another idea. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do as long as you're creating and maintaining that connection and being aware that as a teenager they are going to want to pull away from that connection. So, but you still need to be able to have some lifeline to yourself and them, between you and them.
I like that idea of consultancy as opposed to being like a momager or, you know, manager. I love that. Yeah, that's a great way to think of it.
And it's hard to do because we've been managers for like years and years and years. So it's really, it's really time to step back. And I think, and their interests change. Things that they used to love when they were little, they don't love anymore because they're looking for something that's going to define them. They're looking for a new thing that's going to actually define who they are. Mm-hmm. And we need to be supportive of that sort of process. So yeah,
help them to sort of step away, but know that they can always come back to you if they ever need you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that sort of takes me on to our next slide, which is how do you help children to feel secure? So what we're looking at in this sort of section is we're talking about attachment. So attachment, another way to think of it, is connection. So how do you be the best parent that you can be and get the best results from your parenting is to help your children. So how can you help your children to feel secure and attached? It's by the following: to feel safe, to feel seen, to be soothed, and to feel secure. So to feel safe, the parent or caregiver's role is to protect the children from harm so that your child knows that they're safe around you, and also to avoid being the object of something that might cause them fear. So that's something to be mindful of as well. To help the child feel seen. So as a parent, you know, sometimes we all have those moments where we're time poor or we're rushed and the child is, you know, oh, but my shoes don't feel right or my socks aren't the right color, and they start to cry and you're sort of time poor going, hurry up, just, you know, come on, get going. But I guess in those moments, it's maybe stopping, taking a breath, pausing and going, what is actually happening for this child? Because, you know, they might be talking about their shoes and socks, but really they could be anxious about a test that's at school, you know. So it's about, I guess, seeing your child as to where they are, looking into their world, validating their feelings and letting them know that you're there to see them as a whole, not just a part of your day that they have to kind of fit into. Okay, the next is to be soothed. So soothing is what Tracy was talking about earlier. It's that co-regulating stuff. So it's being able to, I guess, pick up when you're being triggered or when you're having uncomfortable, intense emotions, soothing yourself and then modeling and soothing your child in doing so. And then if you're able to do all of those three things, and not necessarily in that order, over time, it will create a secure attachment to your child, and it'll help them to feel secure in your relationship. So like we said, they can feel like they can go out, but then they can always come back to you as that secure base. But then sometimes, you know, like we talked about when we're time poor, we're having a bad day, children's tantrums or meltdowns might actually trigger something in you. You might start to feel things like, you know, I'm not doing the best job I can, or I'm not a good enough parent, or it might even trigger some of your unresolved childhood traumas or traumas that you've had, you know, growing up. When you're in this triggered space, it, like, you know, we were talking about before with Tracy, it switches off your upstairs brain and you start working from the downstairs brain. And intense feelings such as grief, shame, anger can actually result in knee-jerk reactions, and that's when you make those statements, or you say those things where you walk away and you think, oh man, I could have done better, or, you know, that I really hurt my child when I said that, or I really said things that I shouldn't have said. And that's when you're working from your downstairs brain and you're working from a knee-jerk reaction, and you're being in that triggered space. So I guess it's about being mindful of when you do have those moments where you walk away and you're thinking that could have been better. It's about not getting stuck in belittling yourself or berating yourself, but using it more as a learning experience. So thinking, well, what what came up for me? Why was I triggered? You know, what could I have said better? And just use it as a learning experience. And if you can do it by yourself, that's great. But if you need to also do that in conjunction with a therapist or a psychologist, counselor, I definitely encourage you to do that as well.
And Alison, are parents always aware of themselves being triggered when they're having a reaction to their child having a reaction?
No, I don't necessarily think so. I think, you know, we all have those moments where we walk away and we're like, oh, that, you know, it wasn't too bad, like that wasn't the best thing I should have done or whatever. But people don't always know when they're being triggered. Like, for example, one of the things that we see in separated parents is, you know, mum or dad might come to us and say, you know, little Johnny or Joey or whatever is quite demanding, and that reminds me of the other parent. And then the moment they start making demands, I get, you know, really upset, and so I can't connect with my child in those moments. And so then I might just send them away, or I might yell at them, or just ignore them and invalidate their experience. So in that space, I guess it's about being aware, you know, when you walk away and you think, oh, that didn't go the way it should have been, or I could have done better. It's a bit of a light bulb that, you know, yeah, I am being triggered. And then in situations where there is separation, we're going to be looking at a Venn diagram now, where you can kind of see that, you know, yes, the child is, you know, percentage of you and the percentage of the other parent, but right in the middle there of that Venn diagram is that child, which is the things that are very unique to that child. There's things that are just only that child can, you know, bring into your life. So it's, you know, they might have mum's eyes or dad's hair or vice versa, but they also have that twinkle in their eye. They also might have their hair like put up in a particular way that's just theirs, you know, curly, and they might have it all scruffy, and that's just that child's personality coming through. It's that child's, that what's unique about them. So I guess step two, when you're sort of realizing you're being triggered by the child, and your unconscious trauma, is to sit down and look at your child and focus on what is unique just to your child. What is their experience? So sit down and sit in their world and look at your child as a sum of themselves, as a sum of their total, and what brings them joy, what is just them, and then that will help you to stay attached in those moments where you are feeling where the ground is just not always so stable. So that sort of leads on to, I guess, the next slide, Tracy, that I'm going to ask you to sort of explain to me this idea of mindful versus mindful. And, you know, yeah, if you want to kind of go through that for us, that would be great.
Yep. It's interesting you talk about this separation as well, because separation can be really difficult for kids. And it can lead to what we call a messy mind, which is the mind on the left-hand side that you can see. So you can see both of the people there are looking at the or in the middle. But the one on the left, their mind is full. So it's full of other things, and it's usually full of things that have to do with the past or with the future. And then they're not being in the present moment. So that's all mindfulness is. In terms of being able to allow the child to be in the present moment. Like the person on the right, there's nothing too much going on in the brain. It's nice and clear. It's ready to take information, and so if you're doing a task, or if you're doing something at school, or if you're trying to be creative, your whole mind can be dedicated to that task. If, on the other hand, your mind is on the left and quite a messy mind, it can be really difficult to be able to accomplish things, to be able to accomplish tasks. Mindfulness is something that's quite, it's a big thing at the moment, and there are lots of apps that you can get that can help you to develop mindfulness, because they do things like improve your focus and concentration. Like I explained, if your mind is like the one on the left and it's very, very busy and full of things that have to do with future events or things that have happened in the past, then you're really not going to be able to concentrate. If instead it's like on the right, your relationships will even improve, because you can really fully commit yourself to 100% to the conversation that you're having, to the relationship that you're in, to whatever sort of things going on with the people that you're around. It improves your sense of well-being, because we know if we're thinking about too much, days before Christmas come to mind. When there's too much going on, there's too much happening, and like we all get exhausted and we just want to flop down and just not do anything. So it's for the next week after Christmas. But it's kind of like that. High levels of stress, because you're trying to solve a million problems that are on the outside of you, that are in the future or in the past, and it's really hard to be able to solve those things, but it just allows you to have a high level of stress. So clearing your mind helps you to lower those stress levels and also regulate your emotions, so using that upstairs downstairs connection sort of thing.
Tracy, apart from that, would you also agree that, you know, when it comes to parenting and keeping your child mindful as opposed to mindful, do you think things like around separations or, you know, traumas that are happening, is that less is more when it comes to children? Because sometimes as parents, I think there's that fine line between telling them what they need to know and then telling them things just because you might want to vent. And, you know, I've seen that before, where a parent might feel like they're telling their child all the information that's needed, but it's not appropriate for that age. And
absolutely. I think that's one of the hardest things, I think, for children to cope with, especially during separation. It's important that they know the reasons, you know, that or the good things that may come out from separation. It's good to tell the children about the good things that can come out about me and daddy being separated, or me and mummy being separated. But when you're sort of talking about things like maybe when you're arguing, if you're arguing about when we're picking each other up, or parenting styles, we get a lot of parents coming in who are really having a hard time because their parenting styles are different. And what can happen is that they sort of negotiate that with the kid as well. And so this child is being bombarded with sort of this negative idea of the other parent, and that's a really hard thing for a child to cope with. And the child can actually become quite preoccupied with trying to untangle that, because it becomes very messy, because they love both parents. But if one parent is kind of getting all of their adult feelings out in front of the child, and the child has no way of being able to process those things, wanting to be loyal to both parents as well. And so also, if you're talking about money worries and things like that, children don't have that concept already in their minds about what that means. So they spend a lot of time trying to work out what that means and fearing for the future and things like that. So, you know, if your child is coming up to you and saying, here, I'm giving you my pocket money, then you've got to kind of think, oh, well, what has she or he heard? Also, any kind of custody battle stuff as well, you know, sharing custody with children, all of those things really, it's in the best interest of the child for that to be kept really separate, really private. These are adult concepts that the child has no understanding of. Although you might think your child's really smart, there's a lot, if you think about it, there's so much information that goes into just a concept like being able to share custody of a child. So much is going on that the child's not really developed in, that don't really have those sort of outside bigger picture concepts. And they spend all their time trying to either predict what might happen, or they spend a lot of time trying to wonder about how they can solve that, or they spend a lot of time saying, oh my goodness, I'm making my parents fight. So if you can see on that slide, that mindful, if you're talking about those things, or those things are really being exposed to your child, then they're going to have a really messy mind. And it's so hard for them to actually see the very things that are in front of them. They're not going to be able to concentrate. They're not going to be able to have a really good sense of well-being in that sense. Things that can help with mindfulness, breathing exercises, just getting your getting breathing together is quite a good thing. So because breathing brings you back to that present moment, recognizing emotions and stuff like that. slowing down and not multitasking in the household. So like when you're out at dinner and you're eating, the TV is on, there's conversations going, iPads are being used, mum's cleaning up or dad's cleaning up, or lots of things going on. So getting some time to just be able to slow down as well. And pick up on your child's negative self-talk. So if they're saying negative things about themselves, just challenge them on those things. And that brings us to the next slide, which is grounding your child. So quite often for a situation where your child is anxious, there's a lot of anxiety going around for kids at the moment as a result of COVID, and there have been some big challenges for children just recently. So if your child is feeling anxious or maybe having a panic attack, grounding your child, which is basically getting them into using their 5 senses, either one of those 5 senses or all of them at the same time. But it's really good for your child to be able to come back to their body, because what happens when you're in a panic mode, you're up in your head the whole time. You're just thinking and overthinking and stressing. Your downstairs brain is highly activated, and you're really unable to actually make that connection between your downstairs and upstairs brain. And so what you can do is you can talk about, well, there's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game, which is like thinking about using all of your senses. What are 5 things that you can see in this room that are red? I mean, even if you do it yourself as a grown-up, like I find that this is really helpful for me, even, you know, when I've got too much on my plate and I want to just come back to the body. 4 things you can see that might feel bumpy. What that does is the child actually has to look for things. They've got to think, what is bumpy? What do I think is going to be bumpy in this room? And it becomes a bit of a game. And as soon as you start to do that, the child then stops thinking about the anxious thought, because they're in a task. They're having to do that task. So, you know, name 3 things that you can hear right now in this moment. Well, they have to stop and they have to listen, and they've got to think, oh, there's a bird, I can hear a truck outside, you know. So they're actually getting back into the body, because when you're really anxious or when you're having a panic attack, you are not in your body anymore. You're kind of chopping it off. It's your head's the only thing that matters, and what's going on in your mind. So doing those grounding exercises is really, really important. And you can do them when there's not anxiousness there. You can practice them like daily, all the time, by just giving your child, bringing your child to their body and getting them to pay attention to it. So asking them the questions. So, oh, what did it feel like when you went in the pool today? How did it, you know, or going for a walk with them and saying, oh, how many flowers can you see right now? So things like that. It gets the child into this mode where, hey, hang on a minute, I've got a body and all these senses, and I'm going to be mindful about using them. And I think that's a really important thing for kids, especially that are struggling with a little bit of anxiety or tend to panic. That school refusal stuff can often be a part of those anxious thoughts as well. So, and then working from a grounded space, you really do stay attached. The child staying attached to their body, but you are involved in that somehow, and you're actually creating an attachment with the child too. And I think Alison's going to talk about what a strong attachment can actually look like for a child.
So what is attachment? So like I've said before, think of attachment as connections. So these connections that we have with our internal worlds and the people around us, it helps us to weather the storms of life as it comes up. So when you have a child that can be securely attached to themselves and to their caregivers around them, it allows that child to be more confident and secure in themselves, so they can be more resilient when things come up. When a child is confident and attached to themselves, they're no longer living in that fight or flight moment as much, so they can be more academically improved, so they can do better academically. It'll improve their social confidence, because they're no longer sort of focusing on what's happening internally as much as, you know, how I look or who am I trying to please. They're feeling connected to their caregivers, they're feeling connected to themselves, so they will have that level of confidence that will show, and it'll come out from the inside. They'll also have better physical health, because like, you know, Tracy spoke about before, the enormous amount of brain energy that it would take to stay in that fight or flight mode, that would then go on to affect things like their gut. It'll go on to affect, you know, just your muscles being tense, and, you know, tummy aches and all that sort of stuff, and body aches, and nail biting, poor dreams, all of that. So when you're more attached and you're more secure in your attachment, you will have better physical health as a result of that. And then also, when you look at all of those things together, it will also promote better mental health for you as well, for yourself as the parent to see that in your child, but also for your child to experience that for themselves. On the slide here, there's a picture of a coat rack, and I love this analogy that I heard a while ago actually, when I was sort of worrying about my child growing up, and, you know, coming into the presence of different people with different values, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And I remember someone said to me, think of your child as like a coat rack. So you can only control what are the things that you can put on that coat rack. So you put on your values that are important to you, your beliefs that are important to you, like kindness and gentleness and, you know, love, or whatever's important to you. And then that's all you can control. And then hope that when your child is of an age where they can decide which of those, you know, coats and hats they want to keep, they'll keep the good ones, and the ones that are not so important to them, that they'll discard them. But all you can control is what you put on your child, like on their metaphorical coat rack, is all you can control. And that's a way to also look at it in regards to separation. When you have separated parents and you're worrying about what's the other parent saying, or what's the other parents doing, that creates that mindful stuff, you know, where the child is constantly sort of being in a vigilant state. But if you can just focus on your relationship with your child, stay connected to your child, and focus on those things that you're putting on their coat rack or stand, that will just work to improve your relationship with them, and it'll improve the relationship they have within themselves as well.
I love that coat rack thing. Yeah, I only heard that from you today, Alison, and I'm going to use it all the time in my practice now.
It took me a few attempts to understand it. When I first got told, I was like, hang on, okay, yeah. And then it sunk, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a good analogy.
Yeah, so, it's such a big thing for parents, isn't it? Like, but when they can't control how the other parent parents, it becomes the child's problem, doesn't it? Because they're questioning the child, they're trying to control what's going on in another household, and the child has to become involved in it, because it's the only connection that they have to the other household.
Yeah.
So I just love it. I love that analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. It can also help, you know, with school as well, you know, because sometimes parents, you're not always happy in the teen years with the friendships that your child might have, and you might say, you know, well, I value this and I value that, but, you know, little Tommy, their values are completely different, and that's going to be rubbing off on my child. But then again, it comes back to that idea that all you can control is yourself in that moment, and what you sort of, you know, give your child, gifting them through your modeling. And if you can do that over time, like, you know, your child will realize that maybe, you know, some of mum's stuff is right, maybe some of Tommy's stuff is right, but I'll work with what feels good for me. And, you know, as long as, I guess, they're being safe in what they do, it's all, as a parent, is all you can hope for, as well as they progress through their teen years. Which brings me to one of the questions that we had from the write-in responses around the teen years. So it's looking at, you know, how do I help my child progress through the teen years? And I think the most important thing to look at is building attachment. So it's being physically and emotionally available to your child. It could be from 15 minutes a day, and it can go up to 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, but it's where in those quality bonding moments where you spend time with your child, where you're letting them know that you're there for them. You're letting them know that they're the safe person to be around. They can come back to you. With teenagers, as Tracy said, it's about allowing your child to do separateness and togetherness at the same time without losing your relationship with them. So doing separateness and togetherness. So they're allowed to be separate from you, but still know that they're still connected in with you, with your attachment, so that they can venture out into the world. They can try relatively, you know, new situations, but know if anything was to ever come back or happen, they can always come back to the parents or their caregivers. So that's doing separateness and togetherness at the same time. And I guess it's about being open-minded and judgmental free as well in those teen years. It's being able to have those conversations. You might not have all the answers with social media nowadays. God knows I don't have all the answers of everything that comes on and the memes and whatever else. But I guess it's about just listening to your child, staying focused, and if you put away the extra, like the top level stuff, going a bit deeper and looking at what's happening in their inner world. Yes, they might be talking about this, but what does that really mean for us? And that's how you can stay connected to your teens and weather that storm that is the teenage years. So I've heard. And also, like we mentioned before, sometimes parents who have a history of abuse or suffering from emotional trauma or mental trauma might have difficulty bonding with their children. And if you're experiencing this and you're not able to connect with your child, please talk to someone, please seek help. There's various lifeline you could contact on 131144. There's Relationships Australia that you can contact. We offer a variety of counselling services and educational services as well. So please reach out if you are having trouble holding space for your child, because that is the biggest, I guess, the biggest impact that you can have on your child is being able to hold space and be present with them. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Here at Relationships Australia, we run, as I mentioned before, a number of educational courses on a variety of topics around relationships, and we offer counselling services. These services are available across WA as well as online. So please take a look at our website or our Facebook social pages. Or you can contact us on 1300 364 377. So please reach out if you need to, and we'll direct you in the right area that you need to move across to. And that is all from me today. Was there anything you'd like to say, Tracy, before we finish up?
No, just thank you so much for sharing this time with us, and we really hope that it has given you something that you can use at home. Hope it's been helpful. Thanks very much.
Thanks.